The Afghanistan sun beat down mercilessly on forward operating base Chapman as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez adjusted his gear for what seemed like the 100th time that morning. The 12-man Ranger team had been briefing for 2 hours, studying satellite images and intelligence reports that painted a grim picture of their upcoming mission. Captain Jake Morrison, their team leader, pointed to a cluster of buildings on the overhead display. The compound sat in a valley surrounded by rocky hills and sparse vegetation, perfect terrain for an ambush. Intelligence suggests high-value target Ahmad Nazir is meeting with his lieutenants here tonight. We go in fast, we go in hard, and we get out before anyone knows we were there. Rodriguez glanced around the room at his fellow Rangers. These men had served together for over 2 years, through countless missions across the Afghan mountains. Sergeant First Class Tommy Chen sat studying the maps with his usual intensity, while Corporal David Williams cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision. The youngest member of their team, Private First Class Jake Sullivan, looked nervous but determined. "Sir, what about air support?" asked Sergeant Martinez, their communications specialist. His question hung in the air as Morrison's expression grew serious. "Limited. One Apache on standby, but it's covering 3 other operations tonight. We're going in light and fast. Standard insertion by Black Hawk. Then, we move on foot to the target." Morrison's voice carried the weight of command, but Rodriguez could detect the underlying tension. Something about this mission felt different. The briefing continued with each team member receiving specific assignments. Rodriguez would lead the assault team through the main entrance while Chen's group secured the perimeter. Williams and his fire team would cover the eastern approach, watching for enemy reinforcements. Sullivan, despite his youth, had proven himself as their best marksman and would provide overwatch from an elevated position. As they prepared their equipment, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something bigger than expected. The intelligence seemed too clean, too convenient. In his experience, missions that looked straightforward on paper rarely turned out that way in reality. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Chen approached Rodriguez as they loaded their magazines with ammunition. The veteran sergeant had developed an almost supernatural ability to read situations, a skill that had kept their team alive through numerous close calls. "Yeah, something's not right about this one. Intel feels rushed, like someone wants us in there fast." Rodriguez checked his night vision goggles, ensuring everything was functioning properly. But orders are orders. The team spent the afternoon going through their pre-mission routine. They checked and double-checked their equipment, reviewed emergency procedures, and synchronized their watches. Each man knew his role, knew the insertion plan, and knew the extraction point. What they didn't know was that intelligence had failed to mention several key details about their target. Ahmad Nazir wasn't just meeting with his lieutenants. He was hosting a gathering of Taliban commanders from across the region, planning a major offensive against coalition forces. The compound they were about to assault contained nearly 40 heavily armed fighters, not the 8 to 10 that intelligence had reported. As evening approached, the Rangers made their final preparations. They applied face paint, conducted weapons checks, and loaded into the transport vehicles that would take them to the helicopter landing zone. The weight of their gear felt familiar and reassuring: body armor, ammunition, medical supplies, and the specialized equipment needed for their mission. Rodriguez found himself thinking about his family back in Texas as they drove through the darkening landscape. His wife Maria and their 2 young children had no idea what he was doing at this moment, thousands of miles from the safety of their suburban home. It was better that way. The less they knew about the specifics of his work, the better they could sleep at night. The Black Hawk helicopter sat on the landing pad like a mechanical predator, its rotors slowly turning in the desert wind. The crew chief gave them a thumbs up as the Rangers approached, their boots crunching on the gravel. This was it, the point of no return. "Remember, we stick to the plan," Morrison shouted over the increasing rotor noise as they climbed aboard. "Fast insertion, secure the target, extract within 30 minutes. Questions? No one had questions. They had done this dance too many times to count. The helicopter lifted off smoothly, banking toward their target as the base disappeared behind them. Through the small windows, Rodriguez watched the Afghan landscape pass below, a mixture of brown hills, small villages, and the occasional green patch where farmers had managed to coax crops from the harsh soil. The flight to their insertion point would take 25 minutes, giving them time to run through the mission one final time. Each ranger checked his equipment again, ensuring that magazines were seated properly, that communication devices were functioning, and that night vision equipment was ready for immediate use. Sergeant Martinez monitored the radio channels, listening for any last-minute intelligence updates or changes to their mission parameters. The airwaves remained relatively quiet, which should have been reassuring but somehow felt ominous instead. 10 minutes out, the pilot announced through their headsets. The Rangers began their final preparations, chambering rounds, and adjusting their gear for immediate action upon landing. Rodriguez felt the familiar mixture of adrenaline and focus that came before every mission. The compound appeared below them as a cluster of rectangular buildings surrounding a central courtyard. Thermal imaging showed several heat signatures moving around the structures, confirming that the target location was occupied. What the thermal imaging couldn't reveal was the true number of fighters or their level of armament. LZ looks clear, the co-pilot reported as they approached their landing zone, a flat area approximately half a mile from the target compound. No visible enemy activity. The helicopter flared for landing, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris. The Rangers were out and moving before the skids touched the ground, their training taking over as they formed a defensive perimeter around the landing zone. The Black Hawk immediately lifted off and disappeared into the night, leaving the 12-man team alone in hostile territory. Rodriguez checked his GPS and pointed toward their target. The Rangers moved out in tactical formation, using available cover to mask their approach. The rocky terrain provided some concealment, but they would be exposed during the final approach to the compound. As they moved through the darkness, each man scanning his assigned sector for threats, Rodriguez couldn't help but think about all the missions that had brought them to this point. Some had been textbook operations, quick, clean, and successful. Others had turned into running gunfights that tested every aspect of their training and teamwork. The compound grew larger as they approached, its mud brick walls casting dark shadows in the moonlight. Intelligence had provided detailed floor plans of the main building, showing the room where Nasir was expected to be meeting with his associates. What intelligence hadn't provided was accurate information about the security measures and number of fighters protecting the target. Overwatch in position, Sullivan reported through their communication system as he reached his designated observation point on a small hill overlooking the compound. From there, he would be able to provide covering fire for the assault team and watch for approaching enemy reinforcements. Chen's team moved to secure the perimeter while Williams positioned his fire team to cover the eastern approach. Everything was proceeding according to plan as Rodriguez led his assault team toward the main entrance of the compound. The first sign that something was wrong came when Martinez detected multiple radio transmissions in Pashto coming from inside the compound. The volume of communications suggested far more people than intelligence had indicated. But they were committed now, too close to the target to abort without compromising their position. Rodriguez signaled for his team to prepare for entry as they reached the compound wall. Using hand signals, he coordinated the breach with Chen's perimeter team. In 30 seconds, they would be inside the compound, beginning what they expected to be a quick snatch and grab operation. What they were actually walking into was a carefully planned trap that would test every aspect of their training, their teamwork, and their will to survive. The Taliban commanders inside the compound had been expecting them, warned by an intelligence leak that the Rangers knew nothing about. As Rodriguez prepared to give the signal for the breach, automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions around the compound. The Rangers found themselves caught in a crossfire from prepared fighting positions, facing odds that no amount of training could have prepared them for. The mission had just become a fight for survival, and they didn't even know that somewhere in the darkness, help was watching through a high-powered scope, waiting for the right moment to even the odds. The first burst of enemy fire shattered the night's silence and changed everything in an instant. Rodriguez dove behind a low stone wall as bullets cracked overhead, the distinctive sound of AK-47s mixing with the heavier bark of machine guns. His Rangers scattered for cover as muzzle flashes erupted from windows and rooftops around the compound. Contact! Heavy contact, Martinez shouted into his radio, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. We're taking fire from multiple positions. The Taliban fighters had turned the compound into a fortress with overlapping fields of fire that covered every approach. What intelligence had described as a simple meeting location was actually a carefully prepared ambush site, and the Rangers had walked directly into it. Chin's voice crackled through their communications. North wall is hot. Multiple shooters in the main building. His team was pinned down behind a damaged pickup truck, unable to advance or retreat as bullets sparked off the metal around them. Rodriguez assessed their situation quickly. They were caught in a kill zone with limited cover, facing an unknown number of enemy fighters who clearly had the advantage of prepared positions and superior firepower. The compound that was supposed to contain 8 to 10 Taliban was obviously housing far more. Williams, report. Rodriguez called to his fire team leader on the eastern approach. We're okay for now, but I count at least 6 muzzle flashes from the building to our front. These guys knew we were coming, Sergeant. Williams and his men had found cover behind a low ridge, but they were effectively cut off from the main assault team. From his overwatch position, Sullivan had the best view of their predicament. I count approximately 30 shooters from up here, he reported, his voice steady despite the chaos below. They've got the whole compound set up like a fortress. Machine gun nest on the roof, fighters in every window. The realization hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. This wasn't a snatch and grab mission gone wrong. This was a deliberate trap. Someone had leaked their mission details, and the Taliban had been waiting for them. Now 12 American Rangers were surrounded and outgunned by an enemy force that outnumbered them 3-1. Captain Morrison's voice came through their headsets. All teams, establish defensive positions and prepare for extended engagement. Apache support is 30 minutes out. 30 minutes. In a firefight like this, 30 minutes might as well be 30 hours. Rodriguez knew they had to survive long enough for help to arrive. But their ammunition was limited and the enemy seemed to have an endless supply. A rocket-propelled grenade streaked across the compound, exploding against the wall where Chin's team had taken cover. The blast showered them with debris and left their ears ringing, but miraculously, no one was seriously injured. RPGs. They've got RPGs, Chin reported, relocating his team to better cover. The enemy wasn't just content to pin them down with small arms fire. They were actively trying to eliminate the Rangers with heavier weapons. Rodriguez made a quick decision. Staying in their current positions would only lead to their gradual destruction as the Taliban brought more firepower to bear. They needed to create chaos in the enemy ranks and break up their coordinated defense. Sullivan, I need you to start picking off those machine gunners. Chun, when Sullivan engages, move your team to the north corner of the compound. Williams, hold your position and lay down covering fire. The plan was simple but dangerous. Sullivan would use his precision rifle to eliminate key enemy positions, allowing Chin's team to advance to a better defensive position. It meant exposing themselves to enemy fire, but staying put wasn't an option. Sullivan lined up his first shot, breathing slowly as he had been trained. Through his scope, he could see a Taliban fighter manning a heavy machine gun on the main building's roof. The man was focused on directing fire toward Rodriguez's position, unaware that death was looking at him through a rifle scope. The shot echoed across the valley, and the machine gunner dropped. Sullivan immediately shifted to his next target, a sniper in a second-floor window who had been causing problems for Chin's team. Another precise shot, another enemy fighter eliminated. Moving now, Chin called out as his team sprinted across open ground toward better cover. Taliban fighters turned their weapons toward the running Rangers, but Sullivan's covering fire forced them to duck for cover instead of taking careful aim. The temporary respite allowed Rodriguez to assess their ammunition situation. Each Ranger carried approximately 300 rounds of rifle ammunition plus grenades and other supplies. At their current rate of fire, they would be down to emergency reserves within 20 minutes. Martinez, where's that air support? Rodriguez called to his communications specialist, who was trying to coordinate with their headquarters while bullets snapped overhead. Working on it, Sergeant. Apache is dealing with another situation, but they're trying to break free. Martinez's radio was their lifeline to the outside world, but even that lifeline seemed fragile in their current situation. A new sound joined the symphony of gunfire, the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. The Taliban had brought indirect fire weapons into play, adding another deadly dimension to their trap. Incoming, someone shouted as the first mortar round exploded 50 meters from Rodriguez's position. Shrapnel peppered the stone wall protecting him, sending chips of rock flying through the air. The mortar fire was inaccurate but terrifying, each explosion sending shock waves through the ground and filling the air with deadly fragments. The Taliban gunners were walking their rounds closer to the Rangers' positions, and it was only a matter of time before they found their range. Williams' fire team was taking the worst of it, caught between direct fire from the compound and the incoming mortar rounds. "We need to move," Williams reported. "They're bracketing us with mortars." But there was nowhere to move. Every piece of cover in the area was either occupied by enemy fighters or exposed to crossfire from multiple directions. The Rangers were trapped in a steadily shrinking circle of safety as the Taliban tightened their grip. That's when Rodriguez first heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the chaos of the firefight. It was barely audible over the gunfire, but his trained ears picked up the supersonic crack of a high-velocity rifle round passing overhead. The sound was different from the AK-47s and machine guns the Taliban were using. A Taliban fighter who had been directing mortar fire from the compound's eastern wall suddenly jerked and fell. Someone else is out there, and they're on our side. The mysterious sniper continued working, eliminating Taliban fighters with surgical precision. Each shot seemed to target the most dangerous threats: machine gunners, RPG operators, and fighters in key positions. The enemy's coordinated defense began to fragment as their leaders and heavy weapons operators fell to the unknown marksmen. Rodriguez felt a glimmer of hope. They weren't alone in this fight. Somewhere in the darkness, a skilled sniper was evening the odds, picking apart the Taliban's carefully planned ambush one shot at a time. "Whoever you are out there, keep it up," Rodriguez called into his radio, hoping their mysterious benefactor was monitoring their frequency. The response came immediately, in a calm female voice that surprised every ranger listening. "Maintain your positions. I'll work on reducing their numbers. Air support is 10 minutes out." A woman. Their guardian angel was a woman, and from her professional tone and precise shooting, she was clearly military. But who was she, and how had she known about their mission? The Taliban fighters were beginning to realize they were being hunted from an unknown position. Their disciplined fire began to slacken as fighters left their posts to search for the sniper who was systematically destroying their ambush. Rodriguez seized the opportunity. "All teams, be ready to move on my signal. Our friend out there has them confused. We're going to push forward and consolidate our positions." The plan was risky, but their current situation was unsustainable. The mystery sniper had given them a window of opportunity, and they had to take advantage of it before the Taliban reorganized their defense. "Chun, move to the compound wall. Williams, advance to that drainage ditch on your left. Sullivan, shift position and continue providing overwatch." The Rangers moved with practiced efficiency, their months of training and combat experience taking over. The enemy fire was lighter now, more scattered and panicked than the disciplined volleys they had faced initially. But Rodriguez knew their situation was still desperate. They were still outnumbered and surrounded, and their ammunition was running dangerously low. The mysterious sniper had bought them time, but time for what? Even with air support coming, they needed to survive the next 10 minutes. As if reading his thoughts, the female sniper's voice came through their communications again. "Rangers, this is Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL Sniper Team. I'm going to create a distraction on the south side of the compound. When you see smoke, advance to the main building and hold until air support arrives." A Navy SEAL. That explained the precision shooting and tactical knowledge. But it raised even more questions. What was a Navy SEAL doing in this area? And how had she known about their mission in time to provide support? Those questions would have to wait. Right now, Rodriguez was just grateful that someone with her skills was watching over them in their darkest hour. Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell had been watching the Taliban compound through her high-powered scope for over 6 hours before the Rangers arrived. Her mission was completely different from theirs. a solo reconnaissance operation to gather intelligence on Taliban supply routes through the valley. She hadn't expected to witness 12 American soldiers walking into a carefully prepared ambush. From her concealed position nearly 800 meters away on a rocky outcropping, Sarah had observed the Taliban's preparations throughout the day. She watched as fighters moved into position, set up machine gun nests, and prepared the compound for battle. It was clear they knew the Rangers were coming. Sarah's training as a Navy SEAL sniper had taught her to remain detached and focused on her primary mission. But watching fellow Americans walk into a trap went against every principle she held dear. When the first shots were fired and she saw the Rangers pinned down with no escape route, she made a decision that would define her career. Her Barrett M107 rifle was perfectly zeroed for long-range precision shots. Each .50 caliber round she carried was capable of stopping an enemy fighter at distances exceeding 1,000 meters. She had 20 rounds loaded and 60 more in reserve, enough to make a significant impact on the battle below. The first Taliban fighter she eliminated was operating a heavy machine gun that was pouring devastating fire into the Rangers' position. Through her scope, she could see the muzzle flashes and the way the enemy gunner was systematically working over their cover positions. One carefully placed shot ended that threat permanently. Sarah's years of training had prepared her for exactly this type of engagement. Her breathing was controlled, her heart rate steady, and her focus absolute. Each shot was calculated not just for accuracy, but for maximum tactical impact. She prioritized targets based on the immediate threat they posed to the Rangers below. A Taliban fighter emerged from cover carrying an RPG, clearly intending to use it against the trapped Rangers. Sarah's shot took him down before he could acquire a target. The rocket-propelled grenade clattered harmlessly to the ground, its operator no longer capable of using it. She monitored the Rangers' radio frequency, listening to their tactical communications and understanding their desperate situation. When Staff Sergeant Rodriguez called for covering fire, Sarah was already lining up her next shot. When the Rangers needed a specific threat eliminated, she was there. But Sarah knew that precision shooting alone wouldn't be enough to save the Rangers. The Taliban had positioned too many fighters in too many locations for her to eliminate them all before the Rangers ran out of ammunition. She needed to create chaos in the enemy ranks and force them to abandon their coordinated defense. That's when she decided to use her most dangerous asset, herself, as bait. Sarah's position was nearly perfect for long-range shooting, but it was also isolated and exposed if the enemy discovered her location. By revealing herself and creating a distraction, she could draw Taliban fighters away from their positions around the compound, but she would also become their primary target. She keyed her radio and spoke directly to the Rangers for the first time. "Rangers, this is Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL Sniper Team. I'm going to create a distraction on the south side of the compound. When you see smoke, advance to the main building and hold until air support arrives." Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. "SEAL Team, what's your position and how did you know about our mission?" "Long story, Sergeant. Right now, just trust me and be ready to move when I give you the signal." Sarah's plan was risky, but simple. She would fire several shots from a different position, deliberately revealing her muzzle flash to draw enemy attention. Then, she would throw smoke grenades to create confusion and cover her movement to yet another position. The Taliban fighters would have to choose between maintaining their ambush of the Rangers or hunting down the sniper who was destroying their operation. She gathered her equipment quickly, leaving behind anything that would slow her movement. Her rifle, ammunition, smoke grenades, and emergency medical supplies were all she could carry while maintaining mobility. Everything else would have to stay behind. The new position she selected was 300 meters south of her original location, still within effective range of the compound, but offering a different angle of attack. More importantly, it was visible from several Taliban positions, ensuring that her muzzle flashes would be seen when she opened fire. Sarah settled into her new position and immediately engaged a Taliban machine gun crew that had been giving the Rangers problems. Her shot was deliberately high-profile, designed to create a massive muzzle flash that would be visible even in the firefight's chaos. The effect was immediate. Taliban fighters began pointing toward her position and shouting to their comrades. Several enemy fighters left their positions around the compound to move toward her location, reducing the pressure on the Rangers below. She fired 3 more precision shots, each one designed to be seen as much as to eliminate targets. Taliban commanders were shouting orders in Pashto, trying to coordinate a response to this new threat. Their carefully planned ambush was falling apart as they struggled to deal with an unexpected enemy. Sarah pulled the pins on 2 smoke grenades and threw them toward the compound, creating a thick gray cloud that drifted across the battlefield. The smoke would provide visual cover for the Rangers' advance, while also adding to the confusion in the Taliban ranks. "Move now," she transmitted to Rodriguez. "I've got eyes on the compound. There's a clear path to the main building's north entrance." Through her scope, Sarah watched the Rangers move with professional precision despite their desperate circumstances. Rodriguez led his assault team toward the main building while Chin's team provided covering fire. Williams' fire team advanced to better positions, their movement masked by the smoke and chaos. But Sarah's position was now compromised. Taliban fighters were moving toward her location with determination, and she could hear their voices getting closer. She had perhaps 2 minutes before they reached her position. She fired 4 more shots in rapid succession, each one targeting Taliban fighters who were trying to intercept the advancing Rangers. Her ammunition was running low, but every shot counted toward keeping the Americans alive. Taliban voices were getting closer now, speaking in urgent tones as they closed in on her position. Sarah gathered her equipment and prepared to move again, but this time her options were limited. The terrain around her offered few concealment options, and she was running out of elevated positions that provided effective fields of fire. A Taliban fighter appeared on a ridge line 50 meters away, his AK-47 scanning for targets. Sarah's rifle boomed, and he disappeared. But more would follow, and soon she would be overwhelmed by numbers. She keyed her radio one more time. "Rangers, air support is 3 minutes out. Hold your positions in the main building, and prepare for close air support runs." Rodriguez's voice came back strained but grateful. "SEAL team, what's your status? We can provide covering fire for your extraction." Sarah looked at her tactical situation and made a quick calculation. The Rangers were in a defensible position now, thanks to her intervention and their own professional skills. Air support was minutes away. Her job was almost done, but she was trapped with limited ammunition and enemy fighters closing in from multiple directions. "Negative, Rangers. You worry about yourselves. I've got this." But the truth was, Sarah wasn't sure she had anything under control anymore. She had perhaps 10 rounds left. Taliban fighters were approaching her position from 3 directions, and her escape routes were rapidly disappearing. She thought about her training, her oath as a Navy SEAL, and the 12 Rangers whose lives depended on her continued effectiveness. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. There was still work to do. Sarah selected her next position carefully, a cluster of rocks that would provide some protection while maintaining fields of fire toward both the compound and her approaching enemies. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. As she moved toward the rocks, keeping low to avoid detection, she heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors in the distance. The Apache gunship was finally approaching, bringing with it the firepower needed to end this fight decisively. But she also heard Taliban voices getting closer, and the sound of boots on rocks as enemy fighters closed in on her position. The next few minutes would determine whether she would live to see the Rangers safely extracted or whether her sacrifice would be the price of their survival. Sarah Mitchell had joined the Navy to serve her country and protect her fellow service members. Tonight, in the Afghan mountains, she was living up to that oath in the most direct way possible. Whether she survived or not, she had already succeeded in her most important mission, keeping 12 Rangers alive long enough for help to arrive. The Apache's rotors were getting louder now, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she settled into her new position and prepared for what might be her final stand. The Apache AH-64 helicopter appeared over the ridge line like an angel of death, its 30mm chain gun already spinning as the pilot acquired targets through his night vision systems. Chief Warrant Officer Michael "Ghost" Patterson had been flying combat missions over Afghanistan for 3 years, but The urgency in the radio communications had told him this was different. Apache 7-7, this is Ranger Actual, Rodriguez transmitted from his position inside the compound's main building. We have 12 friendly personnel in the main building, one friendly sniper approximately 800 meters northeast of our position, and multiple enemy contacts throughout the compound. Patterson's gunner, Chief Warrant Officer She2 U.S, was already identifying targets through their thermal imaging systems. The compound below showed dozens of heat signatures moving between buildings, some clearly engaging the Rangers, while others appeared to be hunting for the mysterious sniper who had been disrupting their ambush. Ranger Actual, this is Apache 7-7. I have eyes on multiple enemy positions. Be advised, we also have a Navy SEAL team operating in your area. Danger close authorization requested for immediate fire support. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. Apache 7-7, you are cleared hot. Danger close authorized. There's a Navy SEAL sniper northeast of the compound who's been keeping us alive. She's taking heavy contact from multiple directions. From her rocky outcropping, Sarah Mitchell watched the Apache's arrival with mixed relief and concern. The gunship's firepower would end the Taliban ambush, but she was still trapped with enemy fighters closing in on her position. Her ammunition was down to 6 rounds, and she could hear Taliban voices less than 50 meters away. She keyed her radio one final time. Apache 7-7, this is SEAL Sniper. I'm in immediate contact with multiple hostiles approximately 800 meters northeast of the main compound. Request immediate close air support my position. Patterson banked his Apache towards Sarah's location, his thermal sensors picking up her heat signature among the rocks. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least 15 Taliban fighters were converging on her position from 3 different directions, and she appeared to be alone. SEAL Sniper, this is Apache 7-7. I have visual on your position and multiple hostiles closing in. Keep your head down, we're coming in hot. Sarah pressed herself against the rocks as the Apache's chain gun opened fire above her head. The 30mm rounds tore through the Taliban fighters like a buzzsaw, each high-explosive shell devastating everything within its blast radius. The rocky terrain around her position erupted with explosions as the gunship systematically eliminated her attackers. But Patterson's attention was divided between Sarah's immediate crisis and the larger battle at the compound. Taliban fighters were still engaging the Rangers from multiple positions, and he could see muzzle flashes from windows and rooftops throughout the complex. Chun, take the compound. I'll handle the sniper's position, Patterson instructed his gunner as he maneuvered the Apache for another attack run. She2 U.S was one of the most experienced Apache gunners in the theater, with over 200 combat missions under her belt. Her targeting skills were legendary among her unit, and tonight she would need every bit of that expertise to support the Rangers without causing friendly fire casualties. Her first target was the main building's rooftop, where a Taliban machine gun crew had been directing fire toward the Rangers' position. The 30mm rounds shredded the mud brick structure and silenced the enemy weapons permanently. Inside the compound's main building, Rodriguez and his Rangers watched through windows as the Apache methodically destroyed enemy positions around them. The psychological effect was immediate. Taliban fighters who had been aggressively pressing their attacks suddenly found themselves running for cover as devastating firepower rained down from above. This is beautiful, Corporal Williams commented as he watched a Taliban fighting position disappear in a cloud of dust and debris. Where has this bird been all night? Sullivan, who had repositioned himself inside the building after the Rangers' advance, was providing real-time intelligence to the Apache crew. Apache 7-7, you've got 3 fighters moving between buildings on the east side. They're carrying what looks like an RPG. Chin's response was immediate and decisive. The RPG team vanished in a series of explosions as her 30mm rounds found their target. No friendly forces would be threatened by rocket-propelled grenades tonight. But the battle was far from over. Taliban fighters throughout the compound were adapting to the helicopter's presence, moving to covered positions, and using the building's interior spaces to avoid detection. Some were escaping entirely, melting away into the surrounding terrain before the Apache could engage them. Sarah Mitchell used the Apache's attack on her position to relocate once again. The helicopters suppressing fire had eliminated the immediate threat to her location, but she knew more Taliban fighters would be coming. Her best option was to move toward the Rangers' position and consolidate their defenses. She gathered her remaining equipment and began moving carefully across the rocky terrain toward the compound. Her Barrett rifle was still effective, but her ammunition situation was critical. Every shot would have to count. As she moved, Sarah reflected on the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. Her original reconnaissance mission had been routine: observe and report on Taliban supply movements through the valley. She had been watching the compound for 3 days when she noticed unusual activity that suggested something significant was planned. The arrival of multiple Taliban commanders and the positioning of heavy weapons had convinced her that they were preparing for a major operation. When she intercepted radio communications mentioning an American unit, she realized the Taliban were planning an ambush. Standard protocol would have been to report her observations and let higher command decide on a response. But there hadn't been time for the normal chains of communication and approval. The Rangers were already in the air when she discovered the full scope of the Taliban trap. Sarah had made a split-second decision to stay and provide whatever support she could. That decision had saved 12 American lives, but it had also compromised her primary mission and exposed her to significant danger. Now, as she moved through the darkness toward the compound, she wondered if she would live long enough to explain her actions to her commanding officers. The Taliban fighters who had escaped the Apache's initial attack were regrouping, and some were specifically hunting for her. Patterson's voice came through her radio. "SEAL Sniper, what's your status and intended movement?" "I'm moving toward the Rangers' position. My ammunition is critically low, and there are still hostiles in the area who know my general location." "Understood. We'll provide covering fire for your movement. Rangers, be advised friendly sniper is moving to your location from the northeast." Rodriguez acknowledged the transmission and positioned one of his men to watch for Sarah's approach. The compound was still dangerous, with unknown numbers of Taliban fighters possibly hiding in the various buildings and rooms they hadn't cleared. The Apache continued its methodical destruction of enemy positions, but Shin was being careful to avoid areas where Taliban fighters might be hiding among civilians or in structures that could contain intelligence materials. Every building in the compound was a potential source of valuable information about Taliban operations in the region. Apache 77, this is Ranger Actual. We need to clear the remaining buildings and secure any intelligence materials. Can you provide overwatch while we conduct clearance operations? Patterson checked his fuel and ammunition status. They had enough for another 30 minutes of operations, which should be sufficient to support the Rangers' clearing operations and ensure Sarah's safe arrival at their position. Roger, Ranger Actual. We'll maintain overwatch and provide fire support as needed. Be advised, we're tracking multiple heat signatures that appear to be fleeing the area on foot. Some Taliban fighters were escaping, but that was acceptable as long as the Rangers completed their mission safely. The primary objective had shifted from capturing high-value targets to ensuring the survival of American forces in contact. Sarah reached the compound's perimeter wall and paused to assess her next move. The main building where the Rangers were located was 50 meters away across open ground. She could see muzzle flashes from windows where Rangers were maintaining security, but she couldn't tell if any Taliban fighters remained in the intervening space. She keyed her radio. "Rangers, this is SEAL Sniper at your perimeter wall. I need safe passage to your position." Rodriguez's voice came back immediately. "SEAL Sniper, move to the north entrance. We'll provide covering fire and have someone waiting to guide you in." Sarah took a deep breath and sprinted across the open ground toward the building entrance. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet as hidden Taliban fighters tried to stop her movement, but the Rangers covering fire forced them to keep their heads down. Sergeant Chun was waiting at the entrance to guide her inside, and Sarah dove through the doorway as more gunfire erupted behind her. She was finally safe among fellow Americans, but the night's work was far from over. The Rangers still needed to clear the remaining buildings and gather whatever intelligence they could find. The Apache needed to hunt down escaping Taliban fighters, and Sarah would need to explain to her chain of command why she had abandoned her primary mission to save a Ranger unit she wasn't supposed to know about. But, for now, 12 Rangers were alive who might otherwise have died in a Taliban ambush. Sometimes, that was enough. Sarah Mitchell stumbled through the doorway into the Rangers' defensive position, her breath coming in short gasps from the sprint across open ground under fire. Sergeant Chen quickly guided her to cover behind a concrete wall as bullets continued to impact the building around them. "Welcome to the party," Rodriguez said, extending his hand to the woman who had saved their lives. Up close, he could see that Sarah was younger than her voice had suggested, probably in her late 20s, with the lean build and alert eyes of a seasoned special operations soldier. "Thanks for the invitation," Sarah replied, checking her rifle and taking stock of her remaining ammunition. "I've got 4 rounds left, and a lot of explaining to do when we get back to base." Rodriguez studied her for a moment, noting the professional way she handled her equipment and assessed their tactical situation. "What's a Navy SEAL doing in this valley anyway? This isn't exactly your usual operating area." Sarah glanced around at the Rangers who were maintaining security at windows and doorways. These men had been fighting for their lives for over an hour, and their ammunition was running low. The immediate tactical situation took priority over explanations. "Long story short, I was conducting reconnaissance on Taliban supply routes when I observed them setting up an ambush. When I figured out you were the target, I decided to stick around and help even the odds." Captain Morrison's voice came through their communications. "All teams, prepare for building clearance. Apache 77 will provide overwatch while we search for intelligence materials and ensure no enemy fighters remain." The compound still contained multiple buildings that hadn't been searched, and intelligence reports suggested that high-value targets or important documents might be present. The Rangers would need to clear each structure carefully, watching for booby traps and hidden fighters. Sullivan had found an elevated position inside the main building that gave him a good view of the compound. "I count at least 3 buildings that still need to be cleared. Thermal shows possible movement in the eastern structure." Sarah moved to a window and studied the layout of the compound through her rifle scope. Her familiarity with the area from 3 days of observation made her a valuable tactical asset for the Rangers' clearance operations. "The eastern building is where most of the Taliban commanders were meeting," she informed Rodriguez. "If there's intelligence to be found, that's where it'll be. But they've had time to destroy documents or set up defensive positions." Rodriguez made a quick tactical decision. "Chun, take 3 men and clear the western buildings. Williams, your team takes the storage areas. Sullivan, maintain overwatch from here. I'll take the eastern building with our SEAL friend here." Sarah appreciated being included in the clearance operation rather than being treated as a burden or curiosity. These Rangers were professionals who recognized her tactical value regardless of her gender or service branch. "Before we move," Sarah said, "you should know that building has a basement level that's not shown on your intelligence maps. I observed fighters moving equipment down there yesterday." This new information changed the tactical picture significantly. A basement could contain weapons caches, communication equipment, or hiding Taliban fighters. It would need to be cleared carefully to avoid casualties from booby traps or ambush. The Apache continued circling overhead, its thermal sensors monitoring for any Taliban fighters attempting to return to the compound or set up new positions in the surrounding terrain. Patterson's voice provided regular updates on enemy movements in the area. "Ranger Actual, this is Apache 77. I'm tracking approximately 6 individuals moving away from the compound toward the northwest. Appears to be organized withdrawal rather than random flight." Rodriguez acknowledged the report while preparing his team for the building clearance. The Taliban fighters who were escaping would live to fight another day, but the priority was securing the compound and any intelligence materials it might contain. Sarah checked her pistol and ensured her remaining rifle rounds were easily accessible. Room clearing with nearly empty magazines was dangerous, but she had trained for this type of situation throughout her SEAL career. "Ready when you are, Sergeant," she told Rodriguez as they prepared to move toward the eastern building. The structure was 2 stories tall with thick walls that would provide good cover for any defenders inside. Intelligence photos had shown it as the main meeting location for Taliban leadership, making it the most likely location for important documents or communication equipment. Rodriguez led his small team across the compound's courtyard, moving carefully from cover to cover while the Apache provided overwatch. Sarah followed closely, her rifle ready but her limited ammunition making her cautious about engagement opportunities. They reached the building's entrance without contact, but Rodriguez held up a hand to stop the team's advance. Something didn't feel right about the silence from inside the structure. After hours of intense firefighting, the sudden quiet felt ominous. "Sullivan, you seeing any movement inside the target building?" Rodriguez asked through his radio. "Negative on visual movement, but thermal is showing some kind of heat signature in the basement area. Could be equipment, could be personnel." Sarah moved to Rodriguez's shoulder and spoke quietly. "I observed them moving communications equipment and what looked like weapons into that basement. If they're still here, they'll be down there." The team approached the building's entrance carefully, watching for tripwires or other signs of booby traps. Taliban fighters were known for rigging buildings with explosives when they expected American forces to search them. Rodriguez tested the door carefully before opening it, checking for resistance that might indicate attached explosives. The door opened smoothly, revealing a darkened interior with traditional Afghan furnishings and the smell of recent cooking. The team moved through the ground floor methodically, clearing each room according to standard procedures. They found evidence of recent occupation, warm tea glasses, food remains, and papers scattered as if people had left quickly. But no fighters and no obvious intelligence materials. Sarah pointed toward a narrow stairway leading to the second floor and another set of steps leading down to the basement level. "The basement entrance is behind that curtain. I saw at least 6 people go down there yesterday, but only 4 came back up." This suggested that Taliban fighters might still be hiding in the basement, either waiting to ambush the Americans or hoping to escape after the clearance operation moved on. The basement would need to be approached with extreme caution. Rodriguez made tactical assignments quickly. "Martinez, watch the rear entrance. Thompson, cover the stairs to the second floor. Sarah and I will clear the basement." Clearing a basement with unknown occupants and limited ammunition was one of the most dangerous operations in urban warfare. The defenders had every advantage. They knew the layout, they had prepared positions, and they could hear the Americans approaching. Sarah followed Rodriguez down the narrow stone steps, her pistol ready since her rifle ammunition was too precious to waste on room clearing. The basement was darker than the floors above, lit only by whatever ambient light filtered down from the main level. The smell hit them first, a mixture of gunpowder, fear, and something else Sarah couldn't immediately identify. Then, Rodriguez held up his hand and pointed toward a partially open door at the far end of the basement. Through the gap, they could see the flickering light of what appeared to be electronic equipment. Communications gear, exactly as Sarah had observed during her reconnaissance. This was where the Taliban had been coordinating their operations, and it might contain valuable intelligence about their networks and future plans. But it might also contain fighters waiting in ambush, booby traps, or both. Rodriguez gestured for Sarah to cover the doorway while he moved to check for other entrances or exits from the basement area. They needed to ensure no one could escape or attack them from behind while they investigated the communications room. As Sarah watched the partially open door, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive click of a safety being released on an automatic weapon. Someone was definitely inside that room, and they were preparing to fight. She held up her hand to warn Rodriguez, then pointed toward the door and mouthed the word "occupied." Rodriguez nodded and moved to a position where he could provide supporting fire if needed. The next few minutes would determine whether they could capture valuable intelligence and any remaining Taliban fighters, or whether the basement would become another battleground in an already complex operation. Above them, the Apache continued its patrol, unaware that the most dangerous phase of the mission was just beginning in the darkness below ground.